The city had a way of deciding things for you, even when you pretended it didn't. New York shimmered beneath Evelyn Harper's window, all glass and ambition, taxis bleeding yellow light into the wet streets below. She stood barefoot on the cold apartment floor, phone pressed to her ear, listening to a silence that felt heavier than any argument. "Evelyn," Lucas said finally, his voice careful, restrained. "You're still there, right?" She swallowed. "I'm here." But she wasn't. Not really. Part of her was already somewhere else. A private elevator, a skyline view from the 40th floor, a future that didn't involve counting rent money or pretending the flickering hallway light didn't bother her. Lucas sat on the edge of their bed, miles away in Brooklyn, surrounded by the familiar clutter of their shared life. Books stacked too high, notes taped to the wall, the coffee mug she'd chipped last winter. He had spent the day chasing a lead that might never pay off, believing, as always, that truth mattered more than comfort. "You didn't come home last night," he said. "You didn't text." "I worked late," Evelyn replied. The lie slid out easily now, too easily. She looked at her reflection in the darkened glass. Tailored dress, hair swept back, the faint glint of a necklace Julian had given her, tasteful and expensive. She had told herself she'd return it. She never did. There was a pause on the line. Lucas exhaled slowly. "This isn't about work anymore, is it?" The question wasn't angry. That hurt more. Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of Julian Whitmore's office. The quiet confidence of it. The way he spoke about risk, like it was a game already won. She thought of the contract he'd slid across the desk that afternoon, the salary figure that had made her chest tighten. "You're scared," Lucas continued softly. "I get that. I am too. But we said we'd be scared together. Together." The word pressed against something fragile inside her. "I can't keep living like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep pretending love is enough." Silence answered her, the kind that wasn't empty, but full, of memories of mornings spent sharing bad coffee, of hands reaching for each other in the dark. "So that's it?" Lucas asked. "You're leaving?" She didn't say Julian's name. She didn't say wealth. She didn't say fear. She let the silence do the work for her. "Yes." On the other end, Lucas nodded to no one. "Okay." That was all. No pleading, no accusations, just acceptance, quiet and devastating. They hung up without saying goodbye. Evelyn lowered the phone, her hand trembling now that the decision was done. The city kept moving, indifferent to her small catastrophe. Somewhere below, a siren wailed. Somewhere else, a door closed on a life she would never get back. She told herself she'd chosen wisely. She told herself silence was mercy. Years later, regret would come knocking, not loudly, not all at once, but with the patience of something that knew it would eventually be let in. Silence did not arrive all at once for Lucas Reed. It seeped in slowly, like water through a cracked wall, unnoticed at first, then everywhere. The morning after Evelyn left, he still woke at 6 out of habit. The other side of the bed was cold, untouched. For a brief, foolish second, he thought she was already in the shower, humming the way she used to when she was distracted. Then reality settled, heavy and final. He didn't call her. That was the choice he made, the only one that still felt like his. At the newsroom, Lucas buried himself in work. The clatter of keyboards, the low hum of conversation, the stale smell of burnt coffee. Everything felt reassuringly ordinary. He took on extra assignments, volunteered for stories no one wanted, stayed late until the city outside the windows darkened into a reflection of his own exhaustion. Colleagues noticed the change but didn't comment. Lucas had always been quiet, principled, the kind of journalist who let facts speak louder than feelings. Now he was quieter still. When asked how he was doing, he smiled and said, "Fine," with such practiced calm that no one pressed further. Dignity, he told himself, was not asking why. Dignity was not demanding explanations from someone who had already chosen another life. At night, in the small Brooklyn apartment they once shared, silence became a physical presence. Evelyn's absence echoed in details. The extra toothbrush, the dent in the couch cushion where she used to curl her legs, the empty hook by the door where her coat had hung. Lucas boxed up her things methodically, without ceremony, labeling the boxes with careful handwriting he never smudged. He didn't read old messages. He didn't scroll through photos. That too was dignity. Across the country, Evelyn Harper was learning how to disappear. San Francisco welcomed her with clean lines and glass walls, with offices that smelled of money and confidence. The firm's headquarters rose above the street like a promise, all steel and quiet authority. From her first day, Evelyn understood the unspoken rule. Emotions were liabilities here. She adapted quickly. Her new apartment overlooked the bay, all white walls and carefully curated emptiness. The furniture was expensive and impersonal, chosen by an interior consultant Julian recommended. When she stood in the living room at night, wine glass in hand, she told herself this was what adulthood looked like: space, order, control. Julian Whitmore moved through her life with the ease of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Their relationship had no official shape. He never stayed the night. She never went to his home. There were dinners behind closed doors, weekends away disguised as conferences, touches that lingered just long enough to feel deliberate. "You're doing the right thing," Julian told her once, adjusting his cufflinks as if they were punctuation marks. Sacrifice is maturity. Most people never understand that. Evelyn repeated those words often, like a mantra. She dressed differently now. Tailored suits, neutral colors, no softness allowed. Her colleagues admired her composure, her discipline. They didn't know the effort it took to maintain that polished surface. The way her chest tightened whenever she passed couples laughing on the street, or when she caught herself instinctively reaching for her phone at night. She never called Lucas, not because she didn't want to, but because silence, once chosen, demanded loyalty. Weeks turned into months. Lucas's byline began appearing more frequently. A long investigative piece on housing fraud earned him quiet respect, then recognition. He stood in courtrooms and city halls, listening to people justify their worst choices, and learned to keep his own history locked away. Sometimes late at night, he imagined Evelyn in some glossy apartment, thriving. The thought hurt less than he expected. Pain dulled when it wasn't fed. Evelyn, meanwhile, was learning the cost of her new world. Wealth insulated her, but it also isolated her. Conversations revolved around markets, optics, risk. When she spoke about her past, she edited ruthlessly, no mention of cramped apartments or shared dreams. That version of herself felt embarrassing now, like a language she no longer spoke fluently. Yet in quiet moments, guilt crept in. It arrived uninvited, during a morning commute, while waiting for an elevator, in the pause before sleep. She wondered if Lucas hated her. Worse, she wondered if he had already moved on. Julian sensed her distance and responded with gifts, with reassurance wrapped in authority. "You're safe now," he said, as if safety were the same as peace. One evening, after a charity gala filled with champagne and hollow laughter, Evelyn stood alone on her balcony. The city lights reflected off the water, beautiful and unreachable. She thought of Brooklyn nights, of conversations that lasted until dawn, of being known without trying. She told herself not to romanticize the past. She told herself this was the price of ambition. Back in New York, Lucas deleted Evelyn's contact from his phone. The act felt ceremonial, final. He sat in the dark afterward, listening to the radiator knock, and felt something inside him settle. Not healed, but contained. Silence had become his armor. For Evelyn, silence was something else entirely. A wall she kept reinforcing, afraid of what might break through if she let it crack. Neither of them knew it yet, but silence was not an ending. It was only a pause, one that time would eventually interrupt. Success arrived quietly for Evelyn Harper, dressed in numbers and silence. By her third year at Whitmore Capital, her name no longer needed an introduction. She was efficient, precise, unflinching in meetings where others hesitated. Promotions followed one another with reassuring logic. Each one proof, she told herself, that she had made the right choice. The glass walls of her corner office reflected a woman who looked composed, confident, untouchable. From the outside, Evelyn had won. Her days were structured into immaculate blocks of time. Early mornings with black coffee and market reports, late afternoons in conference rooms scented with leather and restraint, evenings at invitation-only dinners where success spoke in code. She learned how to smile without revealing anything, how to listen without agreeing, how to say no in ways that sounded like yes. Julian Whitmore remained a constant presence, though never officially. Their affair existed in margins, between flights, behind tinted windows, in hotel rooms where no one used real names. He praised her work publicly, mentored her privately, and touched her only where there were no witnesses. "You're exceptional," he told her one night, standing by the window of a suite overlooking Los Angeles. "You understand the game." The game? Evelyn nodded, though she wasn't sure anymore when she had agreed to play. She told herself their relationship was complicated, not wrong. Julian's marriage was a fact she learned to file away, like fine print, unpleasant, but not her responsibility. His wife was a shadow, a silhouette she never met, a life Evelyn refused to imagine in detail. This too was maturity, or so she believed. What she didn't admit, couldn't admit, was how often she felt hollow. The victories were clean but fleeting. Applause faded quickly in rooms where everyone was already thinking about the next acquisition, the next risk. At night, her apartment felt more like a showroom than a home. No photos, no history, just space. She filled that space with work. Ethical lines blurred gradually, never dramatically enough to provoke alarm. She signed off on deals that displaced people she would never meet. She learned how to justify aggressive strategies with elegant language. When doubt surfaced, Julian reframed it. "This is how things work," he said calmly, as if explaining gravity. "Idealism doesn't survive at this level." Evelyn wanted to believe him. Meanwhile, across the country, Lucas Reed's career took a different shape. He had moved out of the Brooklyn apartment long ago, trading it for a smaller place closer to the newsroom. His work grew sharper, his reputation steadier. He chased stories that required patience, that unfolded slowly, like confessions coaxed from reluctant mouths. He rarely spoke about his personal life. When coworkers asked if he was seeing anyone, he deflected with humor or redirected the conversation. His silence had matured into something controlled, almost elegant. Occasionally, Evelyn's name crossed his mind, not with the raw ache of before, but with a dull, persistent curiosity. He wondered who she had become. He wondered if she was happy. He never checked. Years passed like this, parallel lives drifting farther apart, held together only by memory. Evelyn's social media presence was curated perfection. Professional headshots, industry panels, charity galas. She avoided personal posts, but the absence itself suggested success. People assumed fulfillment. No one questioned it. Inside, the emptiness deepened. She noticed it most during moments that should have felt meaningful, when she received a significant bonus and felt nothing but relief, when she stood beside Julian at a fundraising event, his hand warm at the small of her back, and felt strangely alone, when she returned from a luxury retreat and couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed without calculation. One evening, Julian invited her to celebrate a major acquisition. The restaurant was discreet, the wine absurdly expensive. Halfway through dinner, he answered a call and stepped away, leaving Evelyn staring at the candle flickering between them. She watched couples around her, some arguing quietly, some leaning into shared jokes, and felt a sharp, unexpected pang. Not jealousy, recognition. When Julian returned, he didn't notice the change in her expression. "You did great today," he said, raising his glass. "This deal wouldn't have happened without you." She smiled, automatic. "I know." That night, alone in her apartment, Evelyn stood before the mirror and studied herself. The woman staring back looked accomplished, composed, older. There were faint lines near her eyes now, earned not by laughter, but by vigilance. She thought of Lucas, not as he might be now, but as he had been. Earnest, stubborn, frustratingly honest. She wondered what he would think of her choices. The question unsettled her more than she expected. She opened a drawer and found an old envelope she had never thrown away. Inside was a note Lucas had written years ago, the ink slightly faded. "Whatever happens, I want us to choose each other honestly." Evelyn closed the drawer quickly, as if burned. The affair with Julian began to feel less like passion and more like compromise. He grew more controlling, less patient with her questions. When she hesitated over a legally ambiguous maneuver, his tone hardened. "Don't lose your nerve now," he said. "This is why you're here." She signed anyway. That night, sleep refused to come. Evelyn lay awake, listening to the city breathe, aware for the first time that her success rested on foundations she wasn't sure she could defend. The wealth she had chosen had insulated her from fear, but also from meaning. She had everything she thought she wanted, and almost nothing she needed. Somewhere in New York, Lucas finished an article late into the night, unaware that the world he was investigating was closer to Evelyn's than either of them realized. He shut down his computer, the glow fading, and sat for a moment in the quiet. Illusions, after all, could last for years, but they never lasted forever. The first crack appeared in a whisper. It was a Tuesday morning when Evelyn noticed the shift, subtle, almost imperceptible, inside Whitmore Capital. Conversation stopped when she entered a room. Emails that once received immediate replies now lingered unanswered. Julian's assistant, impeccably controlled for years, avoided eye contact as she handed over a revised schedule with 3 meetings quietly removed. Julian himself had changed. He was sharper, more irritable, his confidence edged with impatience. Where he once spoke in long, assured sentences, he now clipped his words as if time were bleeding out around him. "It's nothing," he told Evelyn when she finally asked. "Market noise. Let me handle it." But she had learned enough by then to recognize deflection. The rumors surfaced online before they reached the boardroom. Anonymous finance blogs hinted at irregularities, aggressive leverage, offshore accounts, deals structured to collapse quietly after profits were extracted. At first, the articles were vague, easily dismissed. Then came names, dates, documents. Julian Whitmore's name appeared more frequently than it should have. Evelyn read everything in silence, her pulse steady but her hands cold. Each paragraph peeled back a layer of the world she had trusted, no, relied upon. The empire she had believed invincible suddenly looked fragile, propped up by secrecy and fear. At home, Julian's marriage was unraveling just as discreetly. His wife, Margaret, filed for separation after years of carefully curated appearances. The news broke not with scandal, but with exhaustion. Friends spoke in hushed tones about betrayal, about how long she must have known. Evelyn learned about it the same way she learned everything else, through filtered information, stripped of emotion. "She'll be fine," Julian said dismissively one night, pouring himself a drink he didn't offer to her. "She has lawyers. She has money." Evelyn watched the ice crack in his glass. For the first time, she wondered if anyone ever really had enough protection. As scrutiny intensified, Julian grew more demanding. He asked Evelyn to review documents she hadn't touched before, to approve structures that felt dangerously close to illegality. The line she had been stepping over without noticing now stood stark and undeniable. "This could destroy people," she said quietly during one late-night meeting, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her chest. Julian's eyes hardened. "Don't get sentimental. You think the world is fair? You think anyone at the top got there clean?" Something in his tone, sharp, almost contemptuous, made her flinch. For years, wealth had been her armor. It had promised safety, distance from vulnerability, insulation from consequence. Now she saw its limits. Money could delay reckoning, but it could not prevent it. It could buy silence, but not loyalty, not truth. She began to feel watched. Compliance officers asked questions that sounded rehearsed. Board members requested meetings that felt less like collaboration and more like assessment. Evelyn slept poorly, waking at night with the unsettling awareness that the life she had built could collapse without warning. And for the first time in years, fear returned. Not the fear of being poor, but the fear of being exposed. One evening, as rain streaked down the glass walls of her apartment, Evelyn stood alone and let the quiet stretch. Her phone lay on the counter, screen dark. She thought briefly of calling Lucas. The idea startled her, not because she expected forgiveness, but because she remembered how it felt to speak without calculating risk. She didn't call. Instead, she scrolled through headlines until her eyes blurred, reading the same sentences over and over again. Julian Whitmore, investigation, regulatory scrutiny, internal review. Cracks once invisible had spread everywhere. In New York, Lucas Reed read the same headlines with professional interest. Something about the pattern tugged at him, an instinct honed over years of watching powerful structures fail. He flagged the name, not yet knowing why it felt familiar in a way that had nothing to do with finance. Back in San Francisco, Evelyn closed her laptop and leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window. The city lights below looked distant now, less like promises and more like warnings. For the first time since she had left Brooklyn, she understood a truth she had avoided for years. Wealth could elevate you, but it could not hold you when the ground gave way. And the ground, she sensed, was already shifting beneath her feet. Evelyn first saw Lucas again through glass. She was leaving a conference room on the 32nd floor, her mind still caught in the undertow of compliance reports and cautious legal language, when the elevator doors slid open. Inside stood three people, two junior associates she recognized immediately, and a man with his back half turned, speaking quietly as he adjusted a recorder in his hand. She would have walked past without a second glance if he hadn't looked up. Time did something strange in that instant. It didn't stop. It folded. Lucas Reed's face had changed in small, undeniable ways. The boyish sharpness had softened into something steadier, more deliberate. There were faint lines near his eyes now, earned by long nights and careful listening. He wore a navy jacket, slightly worn at the cuffs, and carried himself with an ease that came from knowing exactly who he was. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, neither of them moved. Then the elevator doors closed. Evelyn stood frozen in the hallway, her heart beating with a force she hadn't felt in years. The world around her continued, phones ringing, footsteps passing, but she felt abruptly removed from it, as if she were watching herself from a distance. Lucas. Here. No warning, no preparation, just the past, standing upright, breathing. She told herself it meant nothing. Whitmore Capital hosted journalists all the time. Panels, interviews, background briefings. It was inevitable. Still, her hands trembled as she reached her office. She shut the door and leaned against it, eyes closed, memories rushing in uninvited. Brooklyn, late nights, truth spoken without fear. She hadn't realized how carefully she had sealed that part of her life until it forced its way back in. Lucas, meanwhile, sat in the lobby several floors below, his expression composed, his pulse anything but. When he'd accepted the assignment, he hadn't known Evelyn Harper worked here. He hadn't connected the last name, hadn't expected the past to reassemble itself so neatly. When he saw her, it felt like opening a book he'd sworn he'd finished and finding an entirely new chapter waiting. "She's senior management," one of the associates said casually. "Harper, brilliant, but private." Lucas nodded, professional. He made a mental note he pretended was only about the story. They met properly an hour later in a glass-walled conference room that reflected too much light and offered too little privacy. Evelyn entered last, composed as ever, her face giving nothing away. Lucas stood when she approached, extending a hand that hovered for a second too long before she took it. "Lucas Reed," he said. "We've met." "Yes," she replied softly. "We have." The handshake was brief, electric, dangerous. The interview began like any other, measured questions, controlled answers. Lucas asked about regulatory practices, risk management, transparency. Evelyn responded with polished precision, her words carefully chosen, her tone steady. But beneath the surface, everything pulsed. She avoided his eyes at first, then forced herself to meet them, finding something there she hadn't expected. Not accusation, not bitterness, but restraint. A kind of disciplined calm that made her chest tighten. "You've built something impressive," Lucas said at one point, his voice neutral. "Thank you," she replied. After a pause, she added, "You've done well too." It was the closest they came to acknowledgement. When the interview ended, the others filed out quickly, leaving them alone for a moment that stretched unbearably long. The city hummed beyond the glass. Evelyn gathered her papers, needing something to anchor her hands. "I didn't know you were covering this," she said finally. "I didn't know you were here," Lucas answered. "Life has a sense of humor." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I suppose it does." Silence settled between them, familiar but no longer safe. I should go, she said. Yes, he agreed. Then after a beat, Evelyn, I'm glad you're okay. The words landed heavier than any accusation could have. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and left the room before she could change her mind. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Lucas's presence had cracked something open, releasing memories she'd kept buried beneath success and rationalization. She replayed the sound of his voice, the steadiness of it, the absence of resentment. It unsettled her more than anger ever would have. Across the city, Lucas sat at his desk long after midnight, reviewing transcripts he already knew by heart. Evelyn's answers echoed in his mind. Not just what she said, but what she didn't. He sensed a story beneath the surface, not just corporate, personal, and for the first time in years, silence felt insufficient. The past had resurfaced, not to accuse, not to reconcile, but to remind them both of truths never spoken, choices never explained, and the fragile line between who they had been and who they had become. Neither of them knew yet that this reunion was not an accident of proximity. It was the beginning of an accounting, one that would demand honesty from them both, whether they were ready or not. The scandal did not break like a storm. It unfolded like a confession, slow, methodical, impossible to stop once begun. Lucas had learned long ago that the truth rarely announced itself. It whispered. It waited for someone patient enough to listen. The first real lead came from a source who insisted on meeting after midnight, in a bar that smelled of old wood and regret. The man sat hunched over his drink, eyes darting toward the door, his voice barely audible over the low music. Whitmore didn't build that empire clean, he said. Everyone inside knows it. They just pretend not to. Lucas didn't interrupt. He never did. Documents followed. Not all at once. Never all at once. But in fragments. Internal memos, offshore transaction records, emails written in the careful language of people who believed they were untouchable. Each piece alone was questionable. Together, they formed a pattern too precise to ignore. Julian Whitmore was moving money through shell entities, leveraging pension funds, bearing risk under layers of plausible deniability. It was sophisticated, elegant, and catastrophic. Lucas felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the sense that he was standing at the edge of something that would ruin lives. That knowledge always came with weight. What he hadn't expected was the name that appeared, quietly, near the margins of several documents. Evelyn Harper. Her involvement was indirect. Advisory approvals, risk assessments signed off under pressure. Nothing overtly criminal, but nothing innocent either. Enough to raise questions, enough to hurt her. Lucas stared at the screen long after the newsroom had emptied, the glow casting sharp lines across his face. He told himself to stay objective, to follow the facts wherever they led. That was the rule he had lived by for years, but rules were easier when the truth didn't have a face. Across the city, Evelyn sensed the shift before the headlines confirmed it. Phones rang more often, meetings multiplied. Legal counsel became a constant presence, their language cautious, their expressions unreadable. Julian grew erratic, sometimes distant, sometimes intensely focused on controlling every detail. "You're loyal," he told her one evening, his tone almost interrogative. "I know I can count on you." The question beneath the statement made her uneasy. When the first major article hit, federal authorities investigate Whitmore capital practices. Evelyn read it twice, her breath shallow. Lucas's name sat beneath the headline, stark and undeniable. Byline, Lucas Reed. Her hands shook. She had always known this day might come. She had just never imagined him as the one holding the light. Julian reacted with fury. Offices closed. Statements were issued. Lawyers worked around the clock. He dismissed the reporting publicly, called it speculative, politically motivated. In private, his temper flared. "They have nothing," he snapped, "and even if they did, they'll never prove it." Evelyn said nothing. Silence once again felt safer, but fear crept in where confidence used to live. She replayed every document she had approved, every meeting where she had chosen expedience over conscience. She had believed she was protected by structure, by wealth, by proximity to power. Now she wasn't so sure. Lucas published carefully, deliberately. Each piece was solid, sourced, impossible to dismiss outright. The response was immediate. Stock prices dipped. Regulators escalated their inquiries. The illusion of invincibility shattered. He avoided thinking about Evelyn as long as he could. When he couldn't, he forced himself to separate memory from responsibility. Love did not exempt anyone from truth. Still, the collision was inevitable. They met again, this time not by chance. Evelyn requested the meeting through official channels, her message formal, restrained. Lucas agreed without comment. They chose a neutral space, a quiet cafe far from the firm, far from the newsroom. Somewhere no one would expect them. She arrived first, sitting rigidly, hands folded around a cup she didn't drink. When Lucas walked in, she looked up, and something in her expression tightened. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. "You're destroying him," she said once they were seated, skipping pleasantries. Lucas met her gaze steadily. "I'm reporting the truth. And if that truth destroys me too?" Her voice wavered despite her effort to control it. He hesitated. That hesitation cost him. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, "but I won't lie to protect anyone." The words landed like a verdict. Evelyn looked away, blinking rapidly. "I thought you understood me," she said quietly. I understand more than you think," Lucas interrupted gently. "That's why this matters." Silence stretched between them, heavier than ever before. Outside, traffic moved on, indifferent to their reckoning. For the first time, Evelyn felt truly exposed, not just professionally, but morally. The choices she had justified for years were no longer abstract. They had names, faces, consequences. And Lucas, the man she had once left behind in silence, now stood at the intersection of love and truth, unwilling to choose one at the expense of the other. The scandal was no longer just about money or power. It was personal, and it was only just beginning. Judgment arrived before the verdict. It lived in headlines, in the sharp cadence of commentators, in the pauses that stretched a second too long when Evelyn entered a room. Whitmore Capital no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a glass cage. Every move was watched, every silence interpreted. The board placed her on administrative leave pending investigation. The phrasing was careful, almost kind, but the message was unmistakable. Distance yourself or be swallowed whole. Her access badge stopped working that afternoon. Security escorted her out with professional politeness, eyes averted, as if shame were contagious. Outside, cameras waited. "Ms. Harper, did you knowingly approve fraudulent transactions? Do you regret your association with Julian Whitmore? Were you involved in the cover-up?" She didn't answer. She walked, chin lifted, heart hammering, the world narrowing to the rhythm of her steps. In the car, her hands finally began to shake. Public judgment was loud. Private guilt was worse. At home, the apartment that once symbolized arrival now felt hostile. Too clean, too quiet, too full of echoes. She turned on the television and turned it off again. She poured a drink and left it untouched. Every object seemed to accuse her of believing too much in appearances. Julian called late that night. "They're turning on me," he said, his voice brittle with anger. "On us." "There is no us," Evelyn replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. A pause, then a laugh without humor. "Don't be naive. You signed what I asked you to sign." "Yes," she said, "and I'll answer for it." He hung up without another word. The investigation moved swiftly. Subpoenas followed. Lawyers spoke in measured phrases that avoided promises. Evelyn cooperated fully, answering questions she had once avoided asking herself. Each admission felt like a small dismantling of her defenses, of the narrative she had built to survive. Through it all, Lucas's reporting continued. He wrote with precision and restraint, refusing sensationalism. Facts only. Context. Consequence. Her name appeared sparingly, but its presence was enough. She read every article, forcing herself not to search for subtext, for mercy. There was none. There didn't need to be. What hurt most was not what he wrote, but what he didn't. No calls, no messages, no attempts to explain himself or soften the blow. His silence now mirrored the one she had chosen years ago, and the symmetry was devastating. They met one final time at her request. Not in a cafe this time. In a small public park, bare trees etched against a gray sky. Neutral ground, again. Honest this time. Lucas arrived on time. He looked tired, thinner, perhaps, but resolved. The weight of the story sat on him like a second coat he couldn't remove. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said. He nodded. "I won't stay long." They walked in parallel for a moment, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet the only sound. She stopped first. "I need you to hear this from me," she said. "I didn't set out to hurt anyone. I didn't think—" "I know," Lucas said gently. "That's not the same as innocence." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "I was afraid," she admitted, "of being small, of going back, of trusting something that couldn't protect me." "And did it?" he asked. The question was not cruel. It was honest. "No," she said. Her voice broke. "It didn't protect me. It hollowed me out." Lucas looked away, toward the bare branches, the winter sky. "I believe you," he said quietly, "about how you felt." Hope flared, reckless and fragile. "But believing you," he continued, "doesn't mean I can stand beside you now." The hope extinguished. She nodded, absorbing the words like a blow she had long anticipated. "I don't expect you to," she said. "I just needed you to know that I see it now. The cost." Lucas studied her face, the familiar lines, the unfamiliar weariness. He thought of the woman she had been, the woman she had become, and the space between them filled with choices neither could undo. "I lost something when you left," he said. "Not just you, my faith. It took me a long time to rebuild it. I can't risk losing it again." Tears slipped free then, silent and unadorned. Evelyn didn't wipe them away. "I understand," she said. They stood there, the past and the present, intersecting briefly, painfully. Then Lucas stepped back. "I hope you find peace," he said, "whatever that looks like now." "You too," she replied. He walked away without looking back. The loss settled slowly, like dusk. Weeks later, the legal outcomes arrived. Fines, sanctions, reputational ruin. Evelyn avoided prison, but the career she had built was effectively over. Recruiters stopped calling. Invitations vanished. Her name, once an asset, became a liability. She sold the apartment. On her last night there, she packed quietly, leaving behind objects that no longer belonged to her life. In the bottom of a drawer, she found the old envelope again. Lucas's handwriting, the promise she had broken. She didn't tear it up this time. She folded it carefully and placed it in her bag. Public judgment would fade eventually. Scandals always did. But private guilt was patient. It lingered, demanding acknowledgement, demanding change. As she closed the door behind her, Evelyn understood the finality of what she had lost. Not just Lucas, not just love, but the version of herself who had believed silence could protect her from consequence. Some losses were loud, others were permanent. Regret did not announce itself with drama. It arrived quietly, the way it always had, with patience. Evelyn Harper rented a small apartment on the edge of Oakland, far from glass towers and familiar names. The place was modest, sunlit in the mornings, unremarkable in every way. For the first time in years, no one knew who she was, and no one cared. The anonymity felt strange, then slowly, mercifully light. She found work that didn't make headlines. Consulting, short-term contracts, roles that paid enough and asked little about her past. People Googled her name sometimes, then decided not to ask. She learned to live with that pause, that silent recalculation in their eyes. At night, the city sounded different here. No constant sirens, no restless ambition humming through the walls. Just distance and time. That was when regret knocked. Not as pain, she had known pain, but as memory. It crept in while she washed dishes, while she waited for the bus, while she lay awake listening to rain tap gently against the window. Regret was Lucas's voice, steady and unraised. It was the way he had let her go without cruelty. It was the dignity she had mistaken for indifference. She understood now what silence had cost them both. Years passed. The scandal became a case study in business schools. Julian Whitmore faded into obscurity, his empire dismantled piece by piece. Evelyn's name appeared less and less, until it existed mostly in footnotes. Context, not focus. Lucas Reed, meanwhile, continued to write. His reporting changed subtly after Whitmore. Less urgency, more depth. He took on long-form pieces, stories about accountability, about systems that failed quietly before they collapsed. His work earned awards, then something more valuable. Trust. He never wrote about Evelyn again. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered if that was mercy or avoidance. They did not speak, not by accident, not by design. Life, once again, had placed distance between them, not the dramatic kind, but the kind that hardened into permanence. One autumn afternoon, years later, Evelyn found herself in New York for a short-term project. The city felt both familiar and foreign, like a language she no longer spoke fluently. She walked without destination, letting memory guide her feet. She ended up in Brooklyn. The old street looked smaller. The coffee shop on the corner was gone, replaced by something polished and forgettable. She stood there for a long time, hands in her coat pockets, breathing in the past without touching it. On a nearby bench, someone had left a folded newspaper. She recognized the byline instantly. Lucas Reed. The article was about a whistleblower, someone who had waited too long to speak, who had paid the price for silence. Evelyn read every word slowly, deliberately. The writing was restrained, compassionate, unforgiving in its clarity. At the end, one line stayed with her. Truth does not guarantee redemption. It only offers release. Evelyn folded the paper carefully and placed it back on the bench. She did not look for Lucas. She did not need to. That night in her hotel room, she took out the old envelope one last time. The paper was worn now, soft at the edges. She read the sentence she knew by heart and felt no sharp pain, only a deep, settled ache. She understood something she hadn't before. Love was not what she had lost when she chose wealth. Love had been lost later. Each time she chose silence over honesty. Regret knocked because it always does, but it no longer demanded punishment. Only recognition. Evelyn slept peacefully that night. In the morning, she would return to her quieter life, smaller, humbler, truer than the one she had chased. She would never reclaim what she had given up, but she would live with her eyes open. And somewhere else in the city, Lucas would continue telling stories, not to heal old wounds, but to ensure they were not ignored. Some choices echo forever. Others teach us how to listen.